So we're getting tantalisingly close to the end of this build now. There is a few more steps that we have to go through, however, and the first one of those is to polish up the nitro finish on the body. And it's been sat now for a number of weeks and it is kind of hardened up really nicely. We've had some good hot weather for the last few weeks and that really has helped with the process, as has giving it that scuff sanding that you might have seen in the last episode. And I'm pretty confident that this will polish up nicely. I've had a little bit of a rub at it just here with some 400 paper and it's actually gone down really nicely, so things should go well. Before I get too far into this episode, I just want to give a massive shout out to friend of the channel Paul Richards, who you might know as the sweary pirate bloke off Milehouse Studios, who actually ran a marathon last weekend in aid of leukemia research. Now, running a marathon is a very, very difficult thing to do, and obviously having a wooden leg has made it even harder for Paul, but he did manage it. But in all seriousness, it is an absolutely amazing thing for him to have done, especially as it was very, very hot that day. Apparently it was the 4th hottest London marathon ever, and he managed to trog his way around 26.2 miles in 22 plus degree heat, which might not sound very hot to a lot of people, but when you're putting your body through that kind of extreme workout, it is very, very uncomfortable and difficult. And from a personal perspective, I think it's amazing that he's doing it for leukemia research, bearing in mind that we lost our great friend Jürgen Zoller to leukemia just a few years ago. I think it would be amazing if we could help Paul raise a little bit of money. So I'm going to put a link to his Just Giving page in the description of this video, and please, please, if you possibly can, just drop down there, hit that link. Even if it's only a few pounds, it'll all add up and make a massive difference. So again, maximum respect, top bloke, absolutely brilliant effort. Well done, Paul. So proud of you, mate. This is quite a complex process and you have to be careful. And I think it also helps to have the right stuff to do the job. And first up in that is the abrasives that you're using. I'm using wet and dry on this one, and I can't stress this enough. Life is far too short for poor abrasives. It's uneconomical, doesn't make any sense financially, makes your life harder, you use more material, and you get inconsistent results. So I prefer to use Klingspor, very good quality paper. It's not really that expensive. You can buy it off eBay in small quantities as well, which helps to kind of limit the financial outlay. I've got paper here that goes from 400 to 1200. So I've got 400, 600, 800, 1000 and 1200 grit paper. Some people like to take it finer than 1200. I don't really see the point, because I will then move on to this G3 rubbing compound, and the abrasives in this aren't actually as fine as the 1200 paper, but the good thing with this polish is as you work it, the abrasives break down and give you a finer and finer finish, which is why I like to use it. I've had a lot of really good results with this. It also helps if you've got a power mop to use with that abrasive, but it's not 100% necessary, but it does give a nicer finish. And finally, I use a swirl remover just to give it that final, really fine polish. But again, this is quite expensive, so if you don't want to kind of spend huge amounts of money doing this, you could kind of skip this. I've got a bowl with some warm soapy water. I've used hand soap in there, which will help draw all the rubbish and the crap out of your paper into the water, but also we use the water to lubricate as we're rubbing down. And also lots of rags and tissues and stuff just to keep drying things off as you go along. You can't really see what things look like when they're wet, so drying them off really helps you to identify where you are in the process. But before I do any of that, there is one final step which relates to something somebody said in the comments after the last episode with regard to these two holes for the controls, because obviously I had to drill those out to get the lacquer out so that the controls would fit back through them. And what they said was, will that allow the water to get under the lacquer, potentially cause a problem? And yes, it would. That would be an issue. However, before I do anything on this, I'm going to take some of this paste wax, which is relatively soft, and I'm going to rub it into all of the holes in the guitar, at least on the top. And what this will do is kind of limit the amount of water that's able to get into them, which will keep the wood dry and stop us from having any issues with it kind of swelling and cracking the lacquer. And I always kind of try and rub as much of that wax off the finish as possible, because it will clog the paper up really quickly. Now obviously I can't fill these holes with wax, but I think if I get a bit of wax pushed in there, I can then take a cotton bud and just kind of coat that whole area. It won't keep it all out, but I can try and keep away from that as much as possible. And I think the combination of the two things will really help keep the water from where we don't want it. And then just one final step, because it is an F hole. I'm just going to stuff some rags into there just to kind of soak up any water that does happen to get in there. I'm not anticipating a huge amount, but you never know. And with that done, I think we've kind of got as much protection in place as possible. So all I'll do is I'll just take my first piece of wet and dry. Just put a little bit of water on there to start with. And I always like to go in little circles when I'm doing this. And the aim here is to take off as little material as possible to get it down to a flat finish. So you've got as much thickness left on as possible. So go steady, kind of dry it off on a regular basis. And for the most part, just that little bit of rubbing has got that down. There's not a lot of orange peel on the top. It is a little bit worse on the back, so we'll have to do a little bit more rubbing. But that's gone flat quite quickly. That's just a bit around there. And it can be a little bit hard to demonstrate because I'm relying on the light shining off this to pick up the little low spots so that will remain shiny. But for the most part, they're all out now, so I'm happy with that area for 400 grit. The problem I've seen in the past is people try to get every single imperfection out with the first grit of paper. But what that means is you're actually taking off quite a lot of material. So I prefer to take the bulk of it out with the first grit of paper and then come back with the subsequent grits to take out the smaller imperfections, which will give you a deeper, more lustrous finish in the end. So I'm just going to carry on now and start working my way through the rest of this top. With the 400 paper, and I'll get back to you when that's done. Okay, and that's the 400 done. That's got virtually all of the kind of orange peel out there. There's one or two little deeper imperfections, but like I say, I'm going to leave those in until we kind of do the next stage of sanding, which is 600 grit. However, before I do that, I'm going to dump this water, clean the bowl out, put some fresh in, and get rid of all of the 400 paper that I've used so far, because the last thing I want to do is kind of inadvertently pick up an old piece of paper and kind of start sanding with that, because I'll just undo the work I've just done. So I'll get set up and then we can do the next round of sanding with the 600. And with that fresh water there, I'm just going to do exactly the same with some 600 grit. But my hope is here that it's actually going to take a lot less sanding at this stage, because all I'm doing effectively is taking out the sanding marks from the last grit of paper. think that's actually looking quite good already, that bit. This bit tends to go a lot quicker. And the closer you get to the final grit of paper, the quicker you'll get those scratches out. And this is all looking very, very nice. I'm happy with the way this is going. I think my new spraying setup with the extractor really has helped in making this job a lot easier and a lot less time consuming than it used to be. I used to have to spend an awful long time sanding to get rid of the orange peel effect, but because I'm not getting lots and lots of overspray landing onto the fresh lacquer, it's a lot flatter and smoother straight out the gun. Okay, so this has been rubbed down now to 1000 grit, and it's really hard to demonstrate, but there's just the slightest luster starting to kind of appear, and pretty much all of the low spots have kind of been polished out now. So the last stage before we get the buffer on it will be to just very quickly go over with some 1200 paper, and it shouldn't take very long at all. And what I always tend to do is, once I get to about 800 grit and I'm happy with the finish at that level, I'll come off the block, so I won't be using the little rubber that I've used on all the other grits. I will just kind of use my fingers, and what that will do is just help kind of blend everything together nicely, and it will also eliminate kind of any risk of there being a sharp edge as the paper comes around this corner, which could effectively dig in and cause scratches that you don't want. So not everyone does it this way, and some people might argue it's not the best way to do it, but it's always worked for me. And hopefully this will take a very short amount of time. It's literally just removing the scratch pattern from a 1000 paper, which in of itself is quite fine and won't go too far into the lacquer. And I've just got some fresh water in a squeezy bottle. I'll just get some of this compound onto the job. You really don't need that much at all. And I've cleaned the pad on the buffer, and it's kind of still quite moist, which is what you want it. That will stop it getting too hot and burning into the lacquer. And I kind of run it at a fairly low speed as well, so it's not kind of creating too much friction. And it really is just a case of kind of polishing it all up until it's the right kind of level of shine. And for a first pass, that seems to be coming up really nicely, but there are kind of one or two slightly hazy areas in there, so we'll get a bit more polish on the job. Not that I've got a huge amount left, it would appear. We'll just see if we can get it to a more consistent finish. And after a few minutes with the mop, that's the top done. Now I might have to kind of come back to this in a month or so's time once it's settled down a bit, but I think for the time being that looks absolutely lush. I'm going to go as far as to say this is potentially the best finish I've ever done on a guitar. But now of course we've got to tackle the back. But I'm not going to do a very high gloss finish like I have on the top on the back. I think a bit of contrast from the top would actually add something to the guitar rather than subtracting. So I'm going to go for a kind of a semi-matte, semi-gloss sheen, if that makes sense, on the back, which means there's a little bit less work for me, but I think it will make for a better instrument. But there is a little bit of an issue that I spotted long before I finished it, but that wasn't the appropriate time to tackle it. So I'll flip it over and I'll bring you in closer and I can show you exactly what I mean. Because there is actually quite a deep little dent or chip taken out of the wood here. And I discovered this at the grain filling stage, but it's just too big to kind of fill with the grain filler. And I didn't want to use a kind of a wood filler or anything on it because more often than not that sticks out like a sore thumb. So what I decided to do was see if I could use a new product that I've been experimenting with, just to see if I could fill it once I'd actually put the finish on. And what I've got is some of this UV Cure clear resin. Now I've been messing about with it, seeing if it's any good for like inlays and stuff like that. But what I found is you can stick it in something, put the light on it, it cures within a couple of minutes to a pretty good hardness, which means you can work it and rub it down and kind of do all the things you would want to do with it very quickly. If I was to try and drop fill this with lacquer, it would just take ages for it to cure because it's so deep. So what I'm going to do is drop a little bit of this in, see if I can kind of scrape it down somewhere near flush, sand it in level, and then see if I can get that to polish up in a similar way to the rest of the body. You might also just be able to see there's a tiny little knot there, and that hasn't taken grain filler either, so I'll do that at the same time. And all I'm going to do is just put a little dot onto that bit of MDF and just use a cocktail stick to put as little as I can get away with realistically into there. And then the kit comes with this little UV light. Stick that on for a minute or so and we'll see how we've done. That's had its appropriate amount of time and that's gone right off. It's not even sticky in any way. So next up is I've got a little single-sided razor blade that I've taped off on both sides, so it just leaves a little bit in the middle exposed. And I'm going to very carefully just start scraping this down until it's somewhere near flat. I don't want it to be kind of totally flat because that would be a bit close for comfort. Let's do the same with the other one. And then from there, just going to block them down. Let's see if we can just get them to flat out. The little one's gone already. There's a little bit more to go on there, but I'll get that with the finer grades of paper. But all in all, I think that has made a really, really nice repair there. You can still see it, but I think once I've kind of forgotten where that was a little bit, it would be relatively hard to find. So if you didn't know it was there in the first place, you probably would never find it. I'm really, really happy with that. I think that is a great little technique. So this stuff is available on Amazon. It's cheap as chips, really. And I would say for this kind of repair work, it works really, really well, and potentially might actually work really well as a grain filler as well. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to crack on with the rest of this back now, and like I say, I'm not going to go too mad with it. I'm going to go to probably about 800 grit and then just hand buff it to see if I can get it to a nice low sheen luster, and we'll leave it at that. But I'm not going to put you through all of that on camera. I'll do it off camera and join you back once it's done. Okay, and there's the back finished. And like I say, it's not been done to a high gloss like the front, but I'm very happy with the kind of semi-matte luster that I've been able to get onto there. And if we look at this tiny repair that I did in here, you can barely see it at all. And I think that will be more than adequate for what we want. And as we've already established, the top is absolutely lush. I have now got the unenviable task of getting all of this material out of the F-holes and cleaning all of the compound and debris out of all of the little routs and stuff on the body. So I'll do that off camera because I don't want to watch myself doing it. I'm pretty sure you don't either. But all in all, I think this has gone better than I could have expected. I'm very, very happy with it. So for all intents and purposes, this is the body finished. We just need to move on to assembly on it when the time is right. But before we can do that, we've got a little bit more work to do on the neck. We need to do some fret work and polish up the lacquer, etc. That's all going to be for the next episode. I'm going to leave this one here. So as always, don't forget to hit the like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. And don't forget to check out that link in the description to the leukemia charity that Paul so bravely supported last week. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.